maligned Marie Antoinette. His kingdom, too, was riddled with contradictions. The central power of the monarchy coexisted with a bewildering array of local structures, rules and regulations, governing everything from the transport of salt to the price of playing cards. Until the introduction of the metric system, itself a product of the Revolution, there wasn't even a consistent nationwide system of weights and measures. The tax burdens imposed by this patchwork of zones and jurisdictions were widely deplored, and the government's privatised tax collectors, the farmers general, universally hated. Perhaps most resented of all were the so-called seigneurial or feudal dues, payments in cash or kind to local lords. Even here, however, matters were far from straightforward. French society was formally divided into three estates: the clergy, the first estate, the nobility, the second, and the commons, the third. But these divisions masked a complicated reality. For one thing, nobility was a tradable commodity. The sale of honours, especially offices carrying noble status, was a government cash cow, and many aristocratic families had bought their titles only in the last couple of generations. Furthermore, while noble status conferred mouth-watering tax exemptions, more than half the nobility was still seriously hard up. Even at the wealthier end of the scale, you were as likely to find a noble running the local ironworks or paper mill as reclining on a chaise longue with a snuff-box in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other. At the poorer end, many were living in similar conditions to the surrounding peasantry. Our picture of pre-revolutionary France may be dominated by the salons of Paris and Versailles, the privileged claustrophobic world of dangerous liaisons. But the vast majority of her 28 million people, first, second and third estates alike, lived in the countryside, many just scraping a subsistence from the soil. Marginal changes in weather or economic policy could make the difference between hunger and starvation, and disorder was seldom far from the surface. Most destabilizing of all, this nation of immense geopolitical prestige was on the brink of bankruptcy. The costs of the disastrous 7 Years' War of 1756 to 1763, and of French intervention in that other great revolutionary struggle, the American War of Independence, proved crippling to an already creaky fiscal system. A succession of ministers appointed by the king had tried to get to grips with the situation since the 1760s, but by 1781, when the popular finance minister Jacques Necker published the Crown's accounts for the first time, the national finances were in massive deficit. It was the attempts of Necker's successors to reorganize those finances once and for all that lit the touchpaper of revolution. At the end of 1786, the new finance minister Calonne put together a comprehensive reform package which included controversial new taxes. He also put together a national body to endorse it, the so-called Assembly of Notables, which met at Versailles in February 1787. But like so many institutions over the coming years, the Assembly took on an unexpected life of its own. Claiming that new taxes could only be authorized by the Estates General, a body representing all three estates last convened in 1614, it refused to rubber-stamp them. After weeks of political standoff, both Calonne and the Assembly were dismissed. Their respective batons passed to the new Chief Minister Brienne and the most important of the 13 regional parlements, or sovereign courts of law, the Parlement of Paris. But the Paris magistrates proved just as awkward, echoing the notables' claims for the Estates General, and adding their voice to growing calls for its convocation. In May 1788, after long months of bluster and negotiation, the regime finally lost patience and issued edicts dissolving the Parlement. There was a nationwide outcry. Riots broke out in cities throughout France, including Grenoble, where on the 7th of June, protesters showered roof tiles on soldiers sent to enforce the edicts. Known as the Day of Tiles, it was a foretaste of the symbolic Journée, or Days of Action, which would become the milestones of the Revolution. Unrest in the countryside was exacerbated by some of the worst weather conditions in living memory, as freak hailstorms devastated crops in the fields.